Welcome to Pop Culture Roulette for all your pop culture needs. We're America's podcast. Obviously, my production value is way lower than yours.
Hey, look, mine's not where I want it to be. We do what we can. So
One of these days, we keep talking about getting a soundboard, so we can have like sound effects or different like theme songs for our various segments.
right.
But that might make us too polished, and well, that's just who knows if
Yeah,
that's ever going to happen.
I'm not really a big fan of the sound effects. Like I use mine for transitions, stuff like that, but
Right.
I don't like it where they drop them in. I mean, I used to listen to a fantasy football podcast and they did it, but it wasn't, it made sense where they put theirs. So what they weren't like overdoing it like the
Yeah.
old school morning radio stations where like every 5 seconds is a different.
I think you
sound
said
effects.
you used to, or you still do listen to Smodcast.
No, I mean I listened to Fat Man Beyond. That's about the only one I listened to.
The early days of Smodcast, he used to
Mhm.
have music tracks underneath the whole episode.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, and then
Drive me
finally,
nuts.
after I don't know how many episodes, he finally was like, "This is too much work."
Right.
One, picking songs, and then two, like doing all the editing. So
Yeah.
he actually hired somebody to go through and strip all the music out of all the old.
Yeah.
Anyway, before we get too much further, obviously this week is a little bit different. I'm joined by Tim Williams, host, creator of 80s Flick Flashback, and a couple other things, but that's mainly what he's doing. So why don't you give us a little background on what it is you do with 80s Flick, and maybe try to tell me exactly what Movie Views is compared to 80s Flick Flashback.
Okay. So movie views is how is would call the mother or the father or the parent of 80s Flick Flashback. So, I used to do movie reviews when I was in like middle school. I was a big, Siskel and Ebert fan, and I'd read reviews of movies, which is something I did. I had subscriptions to like Entertainment Weekly and stuff like that. So I liked English in high school, and somewhat in college until we both had a college course that ruined English for everybody that went through went through our school. But so and then like as I in the last probably 10 years or whatever, people knew me as being like a big, movie buff, and they would ask me, "Hey, what'd you think of this? What'd you think of that?" And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna start posting, my movie reviews on social media. So I just do it on my normal Facebook, my personal Facebook account. But then, so then I was like, well, maybe I'll just. Everybody was making pages and creating groups, and so I was like, well, maybe I'll just do this. And because I was still, getting like news and trailers and other people that were reviewing stuff, and I said, well, so I created this group called Movie Views and just try to come up with a cool name. The name came from like one of those name generator websites, like what are you trying to what do you want this thing to be about? And so that's how Movie Views came about. And so I just started posting like movie reviews, and when I was living in Jacksonville, I was part of another movie Facebook group that were able to get like early screener passes for new movies. And there was a theater that was like 10-15 minutes from my house that was always like the theater where they did the free screeners. And so as I was beginning to do those more, I was like, well, I'm getting to see movies before they come out, so then I can post my reviews a little bit earlier. And so we had that, and then me and Ron, who's a frequent guest on the 80s Flashback podcast, before Infinity War and Endgame came out, we were like, hey, let's start our own podcast, because Ron was really big into podcasts. I had not really listened to any at that point, and he kind of got me and listened to some other podcasts. And so we decided to do this movie podcast, not just about Marvel movies, but that's how we were going to start. We were going to kind of ramp up to Infinity War by rewatching all the Marvel movies and, then kind of doing our own little reviews of going back and watching them, and then kind of leading up to Infinity War coming out. And so we did that. And then we started doing like any new movie that was coming out, we were trying to record it, but our challenge was that most of the time we could only see the movie on Friday or Saturday because you weren't getting free screeners to any of the Marvel movies or like the big movies. So by the time we would actually get to see the movie, then have time to record and edit, it was coming out like the following week. So yes, it could be full of spoilers because that gives people time to go see the movie. But then it just became a challenge with schedules. And then we moved from Jacksonville back to Atlanta, and Ron was still in Jacksonville. So then that's before everybody knew what Zoom was. It was like, well, how are we going to do this? 2 different places. So we kind of let that fall away. But Movie Views, I was still keeping stuff active on the Facebook group. And probably the pandemic hit in February, March. It was probably like either December or January, 2019, 2020, when I was kind of feeling real nostalgic and thinking about 80s movies. And so I started, throwing out stuff on the Movie Views page about, hey, do you remember this movie? Do you remember this movie? And they got this huge reaction from a lot of people that were part of that group saying, oh man, what about this? What about? And they started just throwing out like these, 80s movies they remember seeing as a kid. And so then when the pandemic hit, I was like, I started going back and trying to, rewatch a lot of the 80s movies because there were no new movies coming out at that point. Nothing was at the theater. There weren't, everything was kind of being delayed. So I was like, man, maybe I should just, do a podcast where I go back and watch 80s movies, and instead of having one set co-host, just invite different friends of mine to come on and talk about movies. And it kind of came out. I've said this before on one of the podcasts. I listened to one podcast, I don't think he's even around anymore, that were doing 80s movies, but it was by 2 millennials, and they were dogging the 80s movies because they didn't understand. They talked about how cheesy they were. And I was like, well, you're seeing it from a different context. You're not seeing it as we saw it in the world in 1985. You're seeing it not knowing what the world was like in 1985. And so my original idea was to have me, a Gen Xer, with a millennial, and kind of having our 2 perspectives on an 80s movie, which I still do that a little bit now. Cause like Charlie, who's been on a couple, he's a millennial. He's, he talks about it all the time, but he loves 80s movies. So, that's how it kind of all started, was 80s Flick Flashback. Then was just, we're just going to talk about 80s movies and rotate the co-hosts. And we're about to wrap up the 4th season, and still having a lot of fun with it.
Well, that's all right. So what's your favorite episode so far? Like, what's the one you've had the most either fun or the even if you were like, this movie's not that great, but like it just ended up being like the best episode, or not necessarily the best episode, but the one that you've enjoyed the most.
Yeah. Best and favorite are often, enemies of each other.
Right. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I will say like one of my favorite all-time movies is like, obviously Better Off Dead, the one I did with you.
Right.
But like some of my favorite movies are not what I would call good
great
movies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like Shawshank Redemption, while one of the greatest movies ever made, I can't watch that all the time. I can't sit down and watch Monty Python on the Holy Grail. Like
right. It's all about rewatchability. Yeah.
Right. I've seen Waterboy way more times than one really ought to admit to.
Yeah. I can see that. Honestly, my favorite episode I've done so far has probably been my interview with Diane Franklin from Better Off Dead, because it's something that it was something I'd never done as far as like an interview, and then to interview someone that I'd never met before. Like we met like at the beginning of that podcast recording. So, the nerves were there, and I probably listened to like 4 other interviews with her, with other people, just trying to, kind of know what kind of questions to ask and like what to stay away from, kind of see what, what's the one question she gets asked a million times. You don't ask the same question, kind of thing. So just the preparation for that one was so different. And then she was such a phenomenal guest that she was just, very down to earth, very friendly. Just she was exactly what I expected her to be, just a sweet person. And it just turned out to be a fantastic episode. But that's kind of like it's not the norm episode, so that's why I think that kind of stands out more than any others.
That was a very interesting episode. I mean, just for one, I mean, you managed to get Diane Franklin, but two, like she shared some, like, I mean, obviously she lived through a lot of the movies that we love talking about.
Right.
She shared some stories that like were not like necessarily eye opening, but really just kind of like, wow, I'd never thought of it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, she even, and what I loved about her is she's not someone that's going to like, and it's in her book, which I bought her book, the excellent comedy, or the book about the making of Better Off Dead. I'm butchering the title, but you can find it on Amazon. And even in that, she's like, it's not about spilling dirt or like talking about secrets and stuff like that. It's just this was the experience. And so, which I thought was really cool, that's just her heart. She didn't want to talk bad about anybody. And even the things she shared were people that we may not know a whole lot about their personal life, and she didn't dig that much into their personal life, but still showed us a side of them that we would not have known unless she had told us, which I thought was really, really special and cool about that.
Yeah. I mean, that was, and I do hope that you do get a chance to get her back on. For Bill and Ted, like she said she would, but who knows if that was just her being nice or
I reached out to her because we're doing a big panel for Back to the Future, as you know, which will be coming out really soon. And I reached out to everybody that's ever been on the podcast to say, hey, if you want to do a little soundbite about it. And I was like, I'm going to send it to her. If she doesn't respond, no big deal. But she responded back and just like, I really want to, but I'm really swamped right now. I can't do it. And I was like, that is no problem. Just the fact that you responded back to my email, speaks volumes of who you are as a person. So it's no problem at all. So I think if her schedule allows, then I hope that she'll be able to do it. But that seems to be, kind of her, her personality, her MO.
Yeah. I mean, you're a working actor. I'm sure you're at the whim of whatever project you're on.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what would be your favorite 80s movie you haven't done yet?
Ooh.
Like the,
I was going to say, well, it's cool because I've got some that are coming up next season that I'm really excited about. So Rain Man is one that I'm excited about doing because I was a big fan of Rain Man with Tom Cruise and Dustin Hoffman, but I have not watched it in probably 25 years. So I'm looking forward to watching that again as an adult and then kind of seeing it through different eyes. And then there's a few. And then I'm looking forward to doing The Untouchables, Kevin Costner, which has been been on top of my favorites 80s movies for a while. We haven't covered that one yet. And what's surprising is I have not done a Tom Hanks movie yet, which is amazing. I mean,
that is amazing. I haven't thought of that. Yeah. But,
So I think we're going to do Big next season. And of course, like I have other big, The Money Pit, Bachelor Party, Splash. Like he has such a great, plethora of 80s movies that we just haven't even, like I've done 3 Chevy Chase movies now and I haven't done one Tom Hanks. I'm like, I've got to balance the scales now and do some Tom Hanks movies. So those are a few, but there's a lot. And it's so funny because I just, thinking about 80s movies, like, oh yeah, 10 or 20 maybe, but it's like we're in the 50s now of movies we've done, and we've got another 50 more, and probably still be like, oh, we haven't done this one yet. Oh, we haven't done that one yet. So,
do you have any set way of like deciding, or is it just because I know like when I did the episode of Bloodsport with you, it was because it was kind of like in the news again because of Cobra Kai.
Yeah,
but when it comes, I mean, I know, and also the Friday the 13th ones are kind of set on when that one's happening, and you're gonna run out of those soon. But
yeah, good or bad, I'm a planner. Like that's just how I do things. Like I plan stuff out in advance. So like I've already got season 5, which is basically from July to December of 2022, kind of planned out, but I plan and then I plan to be spontaneous. In other words, like I have it set But if something comes up, like becomes really popular, or I, kind of get a wild hair, or, hey, let's do this movie, then I give myself freedom to adjust the schedule. What I try to do is, for the most part, I try to do things by season and movies that make me feel like I'm in that season. Like now we're in summer. So like we just did Bull Durham. I usually do a baseball movie in like late spring going into summer. So we've done Major League. We did Field of Dreams. We just did Bull Durham. So this time next year will probably be like The Natural or 8 Men Out. And then I'm going to run out of baseball movies at that point.
No, there are a ton. I mean, well, I was about to start listing them, but I'm pretty sure those are actually all 90s movies.
Yeah, there's more 90s and 70s movies, I think. So
yeah, they're because you might be able to do one of the Bad News Bears movies.
One of the bad sequels.
Yeah, one of the not good ones.
Yeah.
But all right, so I mean, obviously your podcast is was definitely more family friendly than mine.
True. This is true.
How do you handle that? Like when you're choosing the movie, like, because you've done a couple of the Friday the 13th,
yeah,
and the First Vacation. You haven't done European yet that I can remember.
No, we haven't. Yeah.
Okay.
We jumped to Christmas Vacation because I do Christmas movie. I do like Thanksgiving movies, Christmas movies. There's not many Thanksgiving movies, but like Christmas movies.
I'm sure just because you'll get the European Vacation at some point. I mean, nobody's really asking for it, but
no, they're not.
But like the 80s also is kind of known for its not necessarily, well, I guess for lack of a better word, it's raunchiness.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a few that I've requested that might be a little bit more on the risque side.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is tricky. Like when we did, me and Bethany did When Harry Met Sally, and it's like, and that's not really a raunchy movie, but the premise of that movie is, can a man and woman be friends without having sex with each other? And it's like, okay, well, we're going to talk about this in a family friendly way. How do we really have that kind of discussion? Which we did, but it still felt kind of weird at times. So yeah, I mean, I think about movies like I talk about Bachelor Party, and like that one probably is not very high on the list of ones that we'll cover. Just because, like, how do you really talk about that movie without getting into some really kind of raunchy stuff in that? But I am talking to adults, and to be honest, my demographic is older, so I'm not really worried about kids necessarily listening to it.
Right.
But it's just but I try to keep it clean. As much as I can.
Just to modernize it a little bit here, I am of the firm belief that you can do Deadpool PG-13.
Right.
It's gonna take a smarter writer,
right?
But you can do it,
right?
I think I don't necessarily know if Alien vs Predator should have been PG-13. Yeah, but I am because I know that there's been a big push of like Deadpool should only be rated R. Well, you can do, because you look at some. Well, the 80s is a bad example because then PG-13 didn't exist until about halfway through.
Right. But even PG-13 then was a lot more lenient than PG-13 is now.
Right. Doc Hollywood.
Back to school.
Yeah.
Why do we remember these things? Because we were teenagers when they came out. That's why.
Right, exactly. Our Blockbuster existed, and that's when we were teenagers. And those were the movies that Blockbuster had.
Right. That we could check out without a parent's permission.
Right. But it is a matter of like, I think that it's possible to do some of that and stay PG-13. You just have to be more creative.
Yeah.
And so I think that, obviously, so when it comes to when I do your podcast, I have to be better at my words than I have to be. And unfortunately, I can be, and I it's a world that I know how to live in. I went to the same college that you went to.
Right.
But I have found myself in the construction industry, so I don't necessarily spend my day living in that world.
Right.
So, yeah. Now, obviously, there's not going to be any time that you run out of 80s movies anytime soon. I mean, there's a 10-year with several hundred movies a year.
Yeah.
So you probably won't.
And I won't cover all of them either, just because some
Some
just
of them
don't deserve an hour worth of discussion on them, probably.
Do you think you'll ever decide to like? Because I know like Empire Strikes Back, one of the first ones you did, was not necessarily the greatest when it comes to audio quality. I mean, it was a good episode, but are you
We
ever
had
going
some
to try to
issues.
go?
Yeah.
Are you ever going to try to go back and redo some of them, or you think
Yeah.
once it's done, moving on?
That is actually something that I've really thought about here recently, because I think the quality of the episodes have gotten better, especially sound wise and then format wise too. I think my format has started to take shape a little. I mean, my format hasn't changed that much, but just transitions and introductions and some of the editing that I do now. I didn't do much editing when I first started, and I edited through the app that I had without really editing, as for lack of a better term. So I have thought about, like, one thing I'm really considering doing before I start season 5 is I'm thinking about going back to season 1 and like doing like an intro for all those episodes to say, hey, thanks for coming back and listening to one of our archived episodes. Please understand we were beginning. There's a lot of, there's great content, but just look past the audio and some of the, technical things that we can't go back and fix. But I have thought about, at some point, do I want to go back and redo some of those movies with better quality? And that's kind of like, I kind of weighing both of those options. Do I want to go back and do them, or I just want to maybe create like, once I get to season 5, does then season 1 become an archived season where people just know, that's, it's not the same quality. It's not the same, it's kind of like going from VHS to DVD. Like season 5 is DVD sharp quality. And like, if you still want to watch the VHS, hey, the quality's not great. And you may have a few like lines go up and down, and the audio may get warbled a little bit. The movie's still there. So those are kind of things I probably spend way too much time thinking about as I look at the future of the podcast.
Well, yeah, I know I get accused of spending more time with my podcast than I ought to, and I really don't do all that much with it. So, all right. I know I had. I know with the Back to the Future thing, you're cheating a little bit because the third one was technically what, 90?
1990, yeah.
1990. Do you think maybe going forward you'll flirt with that line a little bit more, either side of it? Maybe like sneak in like New Hope or just to, because you obviously can do Return of the Jedi and Empire Strikes Back, but
can't do Star Wars. Yeah.
Right. You can't, maybe just going to be like, we're going to fudge a little bit and do it this one just so we can get the set.
Yeah. I mean, now that the podcast is a little bit more established, I think I have that liberty to kind of make some of those changes or make some of those decisions. Like I've thought of, there's some great 90s movies that I'd love to cover. And so I've thought about, maybe, one season, for like a month, or do like some bonus episodes of like, hey, I know it's not 80s, but we really love this movie, so we're going to talk about it. And so kind of like a special edition, special 90s edition, or special 70s edition, or something like that. So yeah, those are fun and creative things that we may look at doing in the future for sure. Because I mean, I would love to do Point Break. I would love to do Tombstone. And going back to the 70s, A New Hope. We didn't do the first Superman. We did Superman 2, but we couldn't do Superman 1 because it came out in 78. Right. Movies like that, especially that you got sequels. We didn't do Alien. We did Alien. So to go back and do some of those that we've done the sequels of, I want to do Rocky 4. I can do Rocky 3, but I'd have to go back to the 70s to do Rocky 1 and 2, I think.
Rocky 1 for sure. I don't know about Rocky.
I don't remember if Rocky 2 was 79 or 80. But yeah, so those kind of things. So yeah, that's definitely something that, I would like to look at doing in the future for sure.
So, because I mean, we constantly say, spoilers, or we set, at the very beginning of our podcast, listen, we're going to talk about whatever we're going to talk about.
Right.
And
right.
sometimes it might spoil. Sometimes we spoil stuff for each other. But I mean, I guess that's kind of the nice part about doing an 80s centric podcast. Yeah. You're not spoiling anything because, well, first off, you're actively choosing to listen to an episode about the movie that you are very clearly like, this is when Harry met Sally. So,
right.
like if you haven't seen it, like it's in the title. Like
Right.
so
We find ourselves saying way too often towards the end of an episode, if you haven't seen this movie, you really shouldn't. Like, well, if you've listened this far,
right.
I'm sure you've seen it already. So
Right. Because I'm about, I think, 8 episodes shy of having listened to all of them yet, because
okay,
they're just like
movies you haven't seen yet.
movies I haven't seen, or I haven't seen in so long I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember. Like, like somehow I've never seen Bull Durham.
Oh yeah. Well, hey,
I don't
yeah,
know how I've never seen that movie.
yeah,
I haven't.
and you'll love it. I already know that
Right.
you'll really like it.
I like Kevin Costner,
Mm-hmm.
and I like baseball.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So
um and Kevin Costner has done a number of really good baseball movies.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Obviously Field of Dreams. But For Love of the Game, which you'll never get to because it's 90s,
Right.
late 90s at that,
Yeah,
is really good.
it is
Like,
really good. I watched that for the first time a couple of months ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think I rented that one when we were still in college. But I remember like just kind of being blown away by like how good it was, and like
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm. Definitely underrated for sure.
have you? I mean, this is just not apropos of nothing because we're talking about Star Wars. Have you had a chance to watch Obi-Wan yet?
Yes, I watched the first two
Okay.
episodes already.
Um, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was
Yeah.
amazing. Because it just happened. We're not going to get too far into it. Just so whatever. Um, but the one thing that I've been bothered by from the 2 episodes, and it's not anything about the episode itself, because both of the episodes I thought were really good, and I'm very curious to see going forward. But I had to do some research into the time frame of the movie from
Right.
the
Right.
end of Attack of the Clones
Mm-hmm.
to the beginning of Obi-Wan to the
Or
beginning of New Hope.
you mean the end of Revenge of the Sith?
Revenge of the Sith. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
Because it went Attack of the Clone Wars of Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard to keep. There's just, and now that there's so much more, that's like, wait,
Yeah.
where does Mandalorian go? Boba Fett
Right.
goes here.
Yeah.
Wait, no, wait.
Yeah, they keep jumping
Clone-
timelines. I'm like, I can't
wait,
keep up
Bad
with which.
Batch is back over here. Wait,
Right. Right.
and now with this Andor series starting, like,
Yeah.
I mean, Ewan McGregor is a fantastic actor.
Mhm.
Very rarely has he ever been the problem in a
True.
movie. But the difference between Ewan McGregor and Alec McGuinness in
Are
what
very
should
great.
very big.
Right.
And there should only be, from what I can tell, about a 10-year gap between the end of this season
Mm-hmm.
and the beginning of the movie.
Yeah. Obi-Wan ages a lot.
Quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I guess it never dawned on me throughout the repeated viewings is that Leia, I guess, is only 18 or 19 at the beginning of New Hope.
A New Hope.
So that would
Yeah.
obviously make Luke the same age. I mean, I guess that explains the whininess, but
Yeah. But she always seemed older than him.
right.
Yeah.
And because I mean, she's a 10-year-old in this,
Mhm.
and then she's one of the first people we see in A New Hope, and you're
Mhm.
like, wait, hold on. Like I always just pictured her as much older, like in her late 20s, early 30s, and now
Mhm.
like we're finding out that she's 18 or 19.
Right.
So that's just just we were talking about Star Wars, and I needed to talk to somebody about it. So
I'm here for. Glad I could help.
all right,
But yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, timelines is always going to be interesting when you're doing those kind of shows. And so, take it for what it is and enjoy it and try not to think too much about it, because it will kind of ruin the experience for you if you spend too much time thinking about it.
Well, and I think that's what I mean. I enjoyed the Clone Wars cartoon after I got past the initial animation, and that
Mhm.
animation style grew on me. But like you realize, like they were shoving a lot of stories on top of each other, or like this story was happening over here, well, this kind of concurrently happening, and then
Mhm.
the fact that entire series was taking place in between 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
So, now that they've got Bad Batch going where that's happening, basically, like kind of, and I think Bad Batch is really, although it's animated, so people aren't going to take it seriously, setting a really good example of the future of what Star Wars can do.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's doing a story at the same time the main storyline is happening over in that movie,
Right.
just in another part of the universe.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
And I think that's what this other new series that they just dropped the trailer for is, Andor, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's what we're gonna see. So I'm really kind of curious to see what's gonna happen with Ahsoka, that
Mm-hmm.
series,
Mm-hmm.
because clearly she went off and did whatever in between
Right.
the end of Clone Wars, the cartoon,
Mm-hmm.
and then when she shows up again in The Mandalorian, which is taking place after, Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm curious to see what, like, so we don't have to stick with the Skywalkers.
Right. Which I think would be a good thing to kind of do something different.
Right. So I think that the Bad Batch clearly was setting the foundation for that, and they're going to be able to go off of that instead of just building on the same storyline.
Right.
So that'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna watch it regardless because I'm too invested at this point. I mean, my entire life has been Star Wars. Like I remember, like we talked about in the episode, I saw Empire Strikes Back first in the theater, and then saw Star Wars on HBO. Afterwards. So I didn't even see it in order when I watched it. But at the same time, it's like I played with the Star Wars toys. I mean, I was probably borderline obsessed with Star Wars toys as a kid. Like those were the only toys that I played with. And my sister still tells a story of she would come home from school because I got home from school before she did. And because they would play Star Wars so much on HBO as a kid, she said she came into the living room and I was sitting like 2 feet away from the TV, like saying all the lines of dialogue with the movie because I had seen it so many times. And my sister was like, "There's something wrong with my brother," So
yeah, I didn't get into the toy. I really did like the movies. I want to say, if memory serves, and obviously trying to remember from that long ago because I was born in '78. So, Empire Strikes Back was the second one, and that was
Correct.
82.
It was 80.
80.
It was 1980.
1980. Okay.
Yeah. Return of the Jedi was 83.
Okay.
Empire was 80.
Return of the Jedi is the first movie I remember seeing in the theaters.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would have been 5, which is probably not true. I don't know if and it also makes me question my father for taking me to see Return of the Jedi at 5 years old.
Yeah. 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 My first movie in the theater was the Muppet movie that I remember is the Muppet movie, which came out in '78. So I would have been 4 when that came out.
Yeah. Because I'm guessing in your area, because you were born in the Baltimore area.
I was born in North Carolina.
North Carolina. Okay.
Yeah.
In the Memphis area where I grew up, I was born in Arizona, but there was a big drive-in theater. And I distinctly remember my parents taking me and my sister to go see drive-ins all the time because they could pack the car full of snacks.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Even then, it was way cheaper because you can get 2 movies for the price of one.
Mm-hmm.
More than likely, my sister never were awake for the second movie.
Right.
So,
look, I was in college when I went to a drive-in, and I wasn't awake for the second movie most of the time.
But I remember going to see a couple of the Muppet movies. Obviously, not the first one, but like the later ones in the drive-in, and that could have been like maybe even like special engagements of like we're re-showing the movie. Come to the drive-in,
Right. But Return of the Jedi, that's, if memory serves me, that's the first movie I remember seeing the commercial on TV and memorizing the date that it was coming out because I wanted to see it the day it came out. Yeah, and I remember being released on a Wednesday, which I thought was weird because I thought movies came out on Friday.
So, well, and normally you're right, but when they have a big movie like that, and I know, and this is where timelines get confusing because I don't remember when E.T. came out.
80. 82.
So 80.
That's it, 82
so,
or 83. Around
so
yeah.
around the same time. If ET came out before Return of the Jedi, I saw ET in the theaters a
Hmm.
couple of times because I remember
Right.
like my parents taking me, like I really loved it. So then like they took me back to the theater.
Yeah.
But
But you got to remember too, back then, movies would stay in the theaters for like 6 months to almost
right.
like a movie like ET was probably in the theater for 10, if not 12 months. So it's
Yeah,
very possible that you saw Return of the Jedi first and then saw ET second, even though
that is
ET may
true.
have come out in the
Well,
may have been
and that
released
was
first.
and that was back when, I mean, when you would have to look at the paper to see
Right.
what was playing where, and like, now like every movie theater is playing the same movie basically.
Right.
You
Right.
know, where then it was like, oh well, the movie theater at the mall is only playing these four movies. The movie theater over here is playing these four.
Yeah, and as I say, you only had most, in small towns, a theater would maybe have two screens. Yeah, it's a big deal if you had like four or six. I mean, now they're 15 and 24 movie theaters. So, but back then, like I remember most of the movie theaters, I remember going to see a movie, and when I was a kid, was maybe four, maybe a six. Uh, but yeah, like I remember like, there was a when we lived in Maryland, my dad was military. We lived in Fort Meade. They had a movie theater on base, but it was just a single screen movie theater. And so, and they would, you would run like a movie for the weekend. So, but it was always like movies that had been out for a while. Like back when they saw dollar movies where you go see a movie for $1 or $2, it was kind of those. But like I saw RoboCop in that movie theater for the first time. So I mean, I didn't see it when it first came out. I mean, I saw Caddyshack 2. Not that I want to brag about that one, but I saw a lot of movies that were not necessarily like blockbuster movies because they would have like lesser movies on during the week, and then the more like blockbuster quote unquote movies ran like Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, like twice on Saturday, twice on Sunday. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember, well, it was even up until college in my parents' part of town where they live in a town right outside of DC,
mhm.
where they still had movie theaters at the mall. Like
Oh yeah,
that used to
yeah,
be where the movie theater was for
exactly. Oh yeah,
growing
yeah.
up. Like you had to go to the mall. So like you
Hmm.
would go get some shopping done, see a movie, maybe get dinner, and then, you
Food
know,
court, yeah.
right,
Got
you know,
to get that orange Julius and Sparrow pizza before the movie starts.
absolutely. All right. Well, let's get into some of the slightly weirder side of things.
We haven't been weird already.
Oh well, no, come on now. Can't be. Where is it here? Ah, here we go. Okay, so we're already there. All right, so well, not getting weird yet, but what feeds you? Like what keeps you going? Like when you're consuming, pop culture, or what inspires you, I guess.
That's a good question. Well, I mean, what keeps me going is my faith. I mean, that's I know this isn't that type of podcast, but I mean, that's there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. So
Absolutely.
I gotta hold on to my faith, and that good eventually will prevail at some point. Even though I
Oh,
don't
you're
see it that much
100%
now.
right, and it's
Yeah,
something I don't talk about often enough.
right,
For I know I should do a better job of talking about it or bringing it up, but
right. Yeah. So, but as far as like pop culture, like the things that inspire me is, uh, I love good writing. Um, a great story, great storytellers. You can be amazed by, special effects. You can be amazed by, uh, the technical things in movies. But if the story doesn't, if I don't feel immersed in the story, then that doesn't inspire. And I like movies that inspire me that do show hope, that do show, good prevailing over evil, or at least are inspiring you to be better, inspiring you to want to be better, being encouraged by the actions of others, those kind of things. So, yeah, that's my answer.
Well, I mean, I think I definitely get where you're coming from, and this is my bag on Zack Snyder segment that happens in most podcasts. I will say that's where like Sucker Punch fails miserably. because it looks gorgeous. It is an
Right. Right.
incredible looking movie.
Right.
Cinematography, everything looks great. It's empty. Like
Yeah.
it's
Oh yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
screen, like the script is so threadbare. They're like it's just a terrible movie.
Yeah.
Where I just went and saw not too in the last couple weeks a little I don't know how independent it is. It's called Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah. I've been hearing a lot about it. I haven't seen it
Um,
yet.
it's really good.
Right. That's what I
About
hear.
25 to 40% subtitled.
Okay.
So, be prepared.
Right.
So I wasn't. Um, it's a little confusing, but it sits with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those like I'm gonna need to see it a second time to really soak it all in.
Right. Right.
Because like I feel like there was a big plot there. I just need to see it a second time to make sure I understood what it was happening.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm like thinking about movies. Like I love the '80s movies, and I enjoy watching the movies, '80s movies. But a lot of them, at least not I say a lot of them, but a lot of times I'm watching '80s movies just for the nostalgia factor. Like I'm not going in for the story and for the storytelling, but there are great storytellers. Like I'll still say Steven Spielberg is probably one of the greatest film storytellers. Consistently can make a great movie purely by how he can tell a story and how he can make you feel a part of that story. But I do a thing on my, Laramie got me into it. It's a website I wish it was an app, but it's a website called Flickchart, FLICKCHART. And it's basically like, it helps you build like your favorite movies. And so it does, it pops up 2 different movies and you click which one is better. And the more you do, it creates a list of, your number 1, number 2, number 3 movie based on how you rate it against another movie. And so I've been doing that for, I guess a year now. So I have a pretty extensive like list. And so I thought it was like, I'm going to go back and watch the top 20 movies I have listed. Because some I have, and some I'll like, it'll ask you, like, if you have 2 movies pop up, it'll say, this one or this one, or haven't seen this one or haven't seen this one, haven't seen both. So like, you don't vote for ones you haven't seen. Just if you say I haven't seen this one, it'll keep the one you've seen up, and then it'll recycle or refresh into another movie, and so you put 2 that you've seen together. But there's a lot of movies that pop up and I'm like, I know I've seen that, but it's so long ago I don't know how to rate it if I know if it's better than this by going off of memory. So there's a lot that I haven't rated. But anyway, but so I'm go ahead.
I feel like you've just handed me my new obsession.
Yeah, it's right. That's kind of how it happens. Yeah. And you can do it by like decade. Like I've got I'll do like an 80s group where you just do by the decade, or you can do like all time. So it's pretty cool. So yeah, definitely check it out. But so I've been thinking about for the month of June, which I'm thinking about doing, is I'm going to go back and rewatch my top 20 and see, do these still belong in my top 20 movies? But going back and looking at that list, those are movies that have stuck with me because they have inspired me. They have they're not only are they my favorite movies, but some of them are really great and well done movies. Like Inception is on there, and Shawshank Redemption, and Jerry Maguire, Rain Man, movies that, A Few Good Men, 12 Angry Men. Like I love courtroom drama, so those are on there a lot. Not a lot of Marvel movies in my top 20, amazingly enough, because they're fun movies and they're rewatchable, but they're not going to stand up against a Braveheart or a Gladiator. And what I realized, there's not a lot of movies that have come out in the last probably 15, maybe 20 years on that list. Like most of them are 80s, 90s. There's a few in the 2000s on there. But it's fun. I mean, and once again, it's like, you're not competing with anybody. You're just like this. I'm just making my own list of what I think is my favorite movie. So,
right. For a little while, I was, and not, like you said, not competing against anybody, but just doing it for my own, self torture. Going through the IMDb top 100 or top 150.
Yeah.
And like either trying to rate every movie that I've seen or go, okay, the top 10, have I seen them all? I haven't seen that one. I need to hunt that one down.
Yeah. I've thought about doing those lists too, like the 100 movies you should see before you die kind of list, because I know there's a bunch of movies on there that are like older movies that I've never sat down to watch that would probably be good to watch. But like for where I am right now, I think I want to revisit some movies, then solely doing movies I haven't seen. I may mix it up a little bit. I may kind of do my 20 and then pepper in a few that would be on somebody else's top 20 that I've never seen. So,
All right. Well, I feel like you maybe have already answered this question.
okay.
But I don't have a definitive answer. Marvel or DC?
Marvel.
Okay, that's why.
As far as movies, yes, Marvel.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole nother conversation for comics,
Mhm.
but that's for me and probably Laramie,
Yeah, yeah.
which gets much nerdier and much more in depth. But okay. Hey, you can't say Hitler because it's been taken and it's boring.
Yeah, I know this question was coming up. Go ahead.
But if you could wedgie anyone in history, who would it be?
If I could wedgie anyone in history, who could it be? It can't be Hitler. Man, that's a good question. I purpose not to hate anyone. And I really say that, and I really say because I don't like hate is such a strong word.
Well, and that's why I purposely chose wedgie, not kill.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
so you're hurting them and you're embarrassing them. You're not
right.
maiming them.
Right. I mean, you are ruining their day, but
Oh man, that's really tough. I know I knew this question was coming and I didn't prepare for it. That's shame on me. Maybe because it's so many people. How do I narrow it down? Oh man. I have no personal vendetta, so it's nobody that's personal. Man, I really don't know. There's a part of me that says I don't know. It's like a group of people, and I don't mean that by like a nationality or a race or thing. I'm like online trolls, or people that use robots to like spam social media or spam our email, so that like those people are like the scum of the earth. Like if I could give them all a wedgie, that's probably the top of my list right now. It's like I get so much junk, having a podcast and trying to be current with social media. I get so much junk in my not my DMs or anything like that, but like people that'll I'll see somebody like something of mine, and I look to see who it is, and it's some spammer trying to get you to click on this link to go here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why? And then I report them and I block them, and 2 more pop up the next day. It's like there is no end to them because it's just a robot that's just trying to scam people.
Yeah.
So
all right. Well, I mean, it's your question to answer how you want.
That's my answer. Not a great answer, but his answer.
You did bring. I would like to wedgie all the people who are ruining the Star Wars fans' good name right now.
Yeah.
There used to be a day when it was being a Star Wars fan was like that made you something different, made you cooler.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Star Trek fan was the jerk. Like they were the ones who were always like, "Oh, you don't touch my."
Right.
And now we've devolved past them.
Yeah, it depends on who you ask, though. I mean, there's still a lot of cool Star Wars fans.
There are, and I mean, there were always a lot of cool Star Trek fans too.
Yeah.
It was just,
yeah.
I think Star Trek maybe got past that point of where they were, before the internet, and now they don't have the same. Although I have a feeling the next time they do a Star Trek movie, then they do something similar to what Star Wars has done. Those people will come out of the woodworks there.
Oh yeah. Give it time. But I was gonna say, like, even with Star Wars, the only Star Wars fans that bother me are the Star Wars fans that can't see any negativity in a Star Wars thing. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I understand you want to be committed and you want to be, a diehard fan, but you have to recognize there were issues.
Oh yeah.
And there are things that could be done better. But even to say that, I have enjoyed at some level every Star Wars thing I've seen, because there's some element of it that tickles that nostalgic piece of that's very Star Wars what they did right there. And so if it has that, then I'm cool. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that I don't like, but that stuff is cool.
Like there are definitely parts of Phantom Menace I don't like, but having rewatched it, Like if you can cut out one entire character,
Right.
that's not a bad movie.
Right.
I mean, there's some bad acting,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of good stuff in it.
Yeah.
I liked The Last Jedi. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people
Oh yeah.
hated it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I mean, there was about a 20-30 minute section in the middle of the movie that kind of really dragged it down.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
overall, I thought that new trilogy that they did was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, there are things where you're like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
I think, and that was one thing. One of the hardest things about the new trilogy is expectation not being met. And you can't let your expectation not being met make you crap on a movie because
right.
it's not the movie's fault that it didn't meet your expectations. And
Well,
so that's why a lot of like I remember talking about this back when Last Jedi. I didn't like Last Jedi when it first came out, but then I waited like 6 months when it came on video, and even still waited to like a little while later. I was like, I want to go back and watch this without the all of the pressing expectation of it being this
right.
what I think it should be, and just seeing the movie as it is. And I enjoyed it a lot more that way.
Well, and I've talked about it multiple times on the regular pop culture roulette.
Mm-hmm.
When they make the announcement for the movie, when they say, "Hey, we're going to be working on it,"
Mm-hmm.
the fans get online and start writing the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So when Phantom Menace happened, not Phantom Menace, when Force Awakens happens,
Mm-hmm.
it's not what the fans wrote.
Right.
Like it's something different. I quite enjoyed
Yeah.
what J.J. Abrams and all
I
of them
loved it.
did
Yeah.
over what the fans had written. But they
Mm-hmm.
were all mad about it because how dare you? Because they had written what they thought was the perfect movie, and
Right.
as a collective group, all over
Mm-hmm.
whatever social media, and so they hated it. But then Last Jedi came out, and then they hated that even more. So now all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, Force Awakens was great, you know. And then so now Last Jedi, and then Rise of the Skywalker comes out. Now we hate that. Last Jedi is actually pretty good,
Right.
And the same thing happened with the prequel trilogy, where it was like, for the longest time, like those were horrible. They were terrible. They were a
Mm-hmm.
joke.
Mm-hmm.
How dare you ruin my childhood? And now people are like, oh man, those movies were great. Hayden
Mm-hmm.
Christensen was awesome, and how
Right.
dare
Right.
you talk bad about Jake Lloyd? It's like, okay, well, first off,
Right. Right.
like, or people are like, give Star Wars back to George Lucas. Did none of you remember what he did with it? Because I do.
Right. Right.
J.J.
Right.
Abrams saved that franchise.
Right. Right. But yeah, like I said, I mean, everybody's going to bring their own different perspective. Just like people love Empire Strikes Back. I love Empire Strikes Back, but it was the one that Lucas didn't have as much. He wasn't at the helm of it as much as he was the other two. He
Right.
he gave over some of that creative, the direction and stuff to Kershwin. So, but and then you know I'm not going to spend time talking about George Lucas because other people have said more or less and worse than I will say. But he still created a world that's still telling stories.
Right.
And whether he executed that perfectly for every movie, no, but he still created a world that's still generating new content, even if is somewhat rehashing old content.
Right.
But it's working.
There are
because
not
we're
a lot
watching
of
it.
there are not a lot of people in history that can say they've done what George Lucas did, or Stan Lee did,
Yeah,
or
right,
Gene
right.
Roddenberry
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
Like they've created a universe that has outlived them.
yeah, for
I
sure.
mean, obviously George Lucas is still alive, but I mean
Hmm.
it has evolved beyond them and taken on kind of a life of its own.
Yeah.
And in a way that I think just you don't get that out of a lot of stuff. Like a lot
Hmm.
of it, like when that author passes or stops doing it, like that franchise just kind of dies where it is.
Hmm. Yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
no matter what other Star Wars TV show, movie, video game, book, whatever gets produced, created, released in the next 20, 50 years, it will all go back to George Lucas and it still be his legacy. even if he had nothing to do with what's happened in the last, in the next 50 years with it, it's still a tie back to him. So he did something right.
Yeah. All right. And just to end it off, well, yeah, let's skip that one. What fictional world would you like to live
in? That is a good question. Fictional world would I want to live in? Does it have to be a world or like a movie? Does it matter?
It doesn't. It's however you feel like answering.
Okay. It's gonna be the first one that popped in my head. I'd want to be with the Goonies. I would want to be in that group of friends and the adventures that they probably continued to go on even after the one movie.
Right.
Like either that one or Stand By Me. Like I like those close friendships. Yeah. Those are my top two.
All right. Well, I appreciate the time.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for sitting down with me. I know I've done a couple of episodes of your podcast.
Yep. We got more to come. Yeah.
Hopefully some more to come. But it's just, I know we've on Media Pod Smash, our parent podcast, the podcast that birthed Pop Culture Roulette. They were talking about 80s flick not too long ago because you did the Friday the 13th, and that is their specialty.
Right.
They did a whole offshoot called Vamping About Voorhees or Vamping with Voorhees, where they did all but like the last two because they just ran out of steam and just couldn't bring themselves to do those last two.
Right.
And they were like, wow, Tim does such good research. He even had stuff we didn't know. So
cool. Very cool. I really try to dig pretty deep when I can, but some of the movies are hard. It's like some movies are tough. Like I'll think, this is going to be, good or bad. I will pick movies without doing any research first. And then it's like, I got to record this podcast in 2 days. Let me start doing my research. And there's like, oh my gosh, there's nothing here. What are we going to talk about? And we still find stuff to talk about. Like some days I've mentioned before, I have like some episodes with like, 14 pages of notes. There's no way I can get through all of it. And then I'll have 4 pages on another, on another movie. And it still takes an hour and a half to get through it all. So, yeah, but that's cool. Right. I'm glad they enjoy it. I'm glad they approve that I got some cred. That makes me feel good.
All right. Well, I know I say this at the end of every one of these interviews, and one of these days I'll sit down and figure it out on how to end it, because I'm sure I should come up with a different ending. And I know what he's going to do because he's done it every time. I'm going to start saying all this. And if I say the phrase, he'll end it, and then I can't have all of this preamble leading up to when I just say stupid never walks alone.
Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes and VCRs and video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? If you want to go back to school, back to the future, or even back to the beach, then the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast is for you. I'm Tim Williams, the creator and host, and on each episode, I'm joined by a guest co-host as we revisit a different 80s flick to discuss our first-time watch memories, iconic scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. New episodes drop every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast.